If you say that, I guarantee you that there will be consequences. The sentence was not spoken out loud, but everyone in the Bundestag's planning chamber could hear it. No interjection, no empty phrase, no rhetorical attack. It was a threat, and it came directly from the mouth of Friedrich Merz, CDU parliamentary group leader, former candidate for chancellor, and the old German, addressed to Alice Weidel, co-chair of the AfD. What he didn't know was that cameras were running, microphones were open, and the moment in which he tried to use intimidation to stop what could no longer be stopped was being broadcast live and filtered. Real time. Millions of people were watching, and that marked the beginning of the end. But first things first, the conference room was unusually tense on this Thursday. The agenda seemed harmless. Budget debate, general speeches, open Q&A session, nothing that screamed for a declaration. But behind the scenes, it had long been known that something would happen today, because the Federal Administrative Court had published a ruling early in the morning that could hardly have been more politically significant. The compulsory public service fee in its current form was unconstitutional. That was more than just a legal blow. It was a political detonation. The decision was clear. The early contribution violated the principle of equality. Citizens would be charged a flat rate without any individual use or influence. The reaction to this was predictable. The CDU remained silent, the SPD relativized. The CDU tried to ignore the implications. Only one party was prepared, the AfD, and in its center, everything was far away. It had not only expected the ruling, it had worked towards it. For months, interviews, expert opinions, motions for debates, background discussions with journalists. It had built up the topic strategically, almost inconspicuously. Today was the moment when the house of cards of the public broadcasting system would be shaken, and it knew it. When Jan's pool of speakers appeared, more people stood up. Not officially, not to speak, simply to be present. Dominant, intimidating, it was his style. But today this style would break down. Ladies and gentlemen, I quote from the ruling. The collection of the broadcasting fee in its current form constitutes a violation of the universal principle of equality pursuant to Article 3. Both spoke slowly with the precision of a skullduggery leader. What this means is that every cent you have collected over the years was illegal, that millions of citizens have been lied to, and that this parliament, with the exception of my parliamentary group, has done nothing about it. Applause from the AfD ranks. Murmuring on the left. Neither of them was deterred. And now you are standing there, Mr. Merz, she continued, looking directly in his direction and remaining silent. Or worse, you are trivializing what has happened here because this system benefits you, because your party helped build this system. That was the moment. Friedrich Merz took 3 steps forward, leaned slightly to the side. His lips barely moved, but it was clearly audible. The microphone on the lectern picked up every word. If you say that, I guarantee you, there will be consequences. A murmur went through the chamber. The cameras swung. Journalists almost jumped out of their seats. The president of the Bundestag did not interrupt the session. He himself was too much in shock. Weidel, the shepherd, blinked slowly once, then her mouth twisted into a half-grin, cold, confidently deadly. Did you just threaten me, Mr. Merz? Cameras are rolling in a democratic parliament. She turned to the presidium. I request that this interjection be clarified immediately, and I demand that the complete audio track of this session be made public. The AfD members stood up. Applause erupted. The CDU struggled to maintain composure. But Merz said nothing more. His face was white. His eyes were fixed on Weidel, but not out of strength, not out of loss of control. Weidel cleared his throat and went back to the microphone. I had intended to only read out the verdict to you today, but what you just did, Mr. Merz, is much more significant. They showed what they are truly afraid of, the truth. Pause. And do you know why they lost? Because they thought power would protect them from arguments. Because they believe pressure replaces enlightenment. But this moment, Their threat will change the country and I will make sure that no one forgets it." She turned from the lectern and walked slowly to her seat. The microphone was still open. You could hear her say, "Halt. If threats are the only thing that remains, then the system is already dead." NZ left the planning chamber, wordlessly, alone, without eye contact. And outside the Bundestag, the screenshots were shared. The soundtrack spread like wildfire. Headlines explode. March threatens Weidel in the Bundestag. Explains to the cameras running. Weidel counters with a cold smile. March flees the session. Political life on Earth. Court overturns, CDU implodes. And while the factions were still sorting out how to classify the incident, it had long since become clear outside that the point at which everything could have been stopped had been passed. A political drama had completed its first act. The rest would make history. Berlin, Friday morning at 7:10 a.m., even before the sun had risen over the gray rooftops of the capital, the Bundestag was once again under pressure. Not by a debate, not by a vote, but by reality. More precisely, by a single 4-second audio recording that has since come to be known as the March Protocol. During the night, independent media had posted the complete audio track of the Bundestag session online. Millions of people were watching, listening, sharing, analyzing. There was no doubt. Friedrich Merz had openly threatened Weidel in public at one of the most sensitive political moments of recent years. And now the public demanded an answer. The press landscape was turned upside down. Der Spiegel headlined, "Crossing Boundaries in Real Time." The moment March lost control. The FC asked, "What is a politician allowed to say and what is not?" And the Bild newspaper summed it up. March at the end. Weidel laughs even more eloquently. The first criminal complaints were filed by citizens, lawyers, even a former constitutional judge. The accusation was attempted coercion of a member of parliament in the Bundestag. The CDU frantically attempted to limit the damage. In a specially convened press conference, the new parliamentary group manager explained, "Mr. Merz used the wrong tone, but it was not a drug, but a rhetorical exaggeration." But his argument did not hold water. His tone was too clear, his choice of words too targeted. Quote, and what finally tipped everything over was that Merz himself remained silent. He had not been seen since leaving the Bundestag the day before. No explanation, no interview, no defense. Instead, Alice Weidel appeared in front of the cameras at 11 a.m. She was not aggressive, not looking to cause trouble, quite the opposite. Objective, calm, almost statesman-like, an appearance that defied all expectations. "I thought long and hard about whether I should respond to Mr. Merz's personal attacks any further," she began. "But the situation is bigger than personal sensitivities. It's about the state of our democracy." Quote, pause, looking into the camera. "If a member of the opposition can no longer speak acquittal in the highest institution of this country without being threatened, then we have a problem. And if the reaction to that is silence, then we have an even bigger one." Then she added, "I will submit a motion in the Bundestag today to set up a parliamentary investigation into political influence on public broadcasting, and I will hand over to the committee all documents that my parliamentary group has, including those that prove that Mr. Merz personally influenced broadcast formats and guest allocations via party agencies." Boom. That was the plot twist that no one saw coming. What began as a personal eclair became the next stage of a political bombshell. Weidel presented initial excerpts, emails between people close to the CDU, PR agencies and public broadcasters. "We would suggest that Ms. Weidel should only be cast in duos with a strong dissenting voice, that is. Or please avoid monologue situations with the FD representatives in the Primtal." The outrage was there immediately, from the general public, but also the press itself. Some journalists reacted with genuine shock. If that is true, we have a credibility problem that goes deeper than any talk show. But there was more to it. Weidel hinted that she was working with whistleblowers. Among them was a former AED editor who wanted to testify about how political guidelines were passed off as editorial decisions. The CDU is reeling. There was open talk in the parliamentary group about Mars's resignation. Some members of parliament publicly distanced themselves. Memes spread on social media showing Mars sitting in a burning planning room with the following caption. In the afternoon, Federal Chancellor Olaf Scholz unexpectedly stepped up to the lectern. He too appeared tense but composed. Mr. Mars's statements must be clarified. The separation of powers is not negotiable. I support the establishment of a committee of inquiry. Now everything was open and Weidel went a step further. The Gesetzbuch has proven that this system is not inviolable. The response to this was a threat. My answer to that is transparency. And I promise him, that was just the beginning. In the plenary session, while she said that, she glanced briefly at the empty square in front of Mars. Symbolically, the people outside were not cheering. They were discussing the tram, canteens, living rooms. The question was no longer, what did Mars say? The question was, how long have you actually been manipulating us? At the end of the day, it was clear that the committee of inquiry was coming. The evidence must be taken seriously. And Friedrich Mars, he remained missing, but an insider from the CDU, quoted anonymously in The World, summed it up, he is politically dead. And Alice Weidel did that with a smile. The Bundestag session the following Monday began unusually quietly. No loud heckling, no loud whispering at the podium, only the quiet turning of papers, the clicking of cameras and the nervousness that hung in the air, although it did not express any. Because today the Committee of Inquiry into Political Influence on Public Broadcasting was supposed to start its work, and that even though only a few days earlier no one had thought of it, had believed that this motion would be valid at all, but everything had changed. Friedrich Mars had still not spoken publicly. Rumors of a hospital stay were circulating. Others claimed that he had fled to the Black Forest, while still others whispered of a voluntary resignation from his mandate. The CDU spoke of a time of internal clarification. What they did not say was that the party was in disarray, at least internally. Half a dozen younger members of parliament had already brought up the concept of a new formation without legacy issues in internal chats, and in the midst of this political turmoil, Alice Weidel entered the chamber with a cool look. In her hand was a thick file plainly labeled on the outside. Case Mars Part. The committee meeting was open to the public. Weidel had insisted on this, even though some representatives of the SPD and the Greens had tried to hold the first hearing behind closed doors, arguing that it was legally sensitive. But the public pressure was too great, and Weidel knew full well that the cameras were her strongest ally today. She opened her statement with a few, but sharp words. I am not standing here today to settle accounts. I am standing here because it is time to tell the truth and because there are apparently politicians who only do so under public pressure. Then she got started. She presented internal email chains that were supposed to prove that CDU PR agencies had been influencing the setting of topics and guest scheduling in talk formats since 2017. Particularly piquant was a contract between a production company and a management consultancy with CDU connections, in which it was agreed to keep unpopular political voices out of the plenary session in coordination with broadcasters. And then the first bang, a note in which Friedrich Mars's initials appeared. FM position on the topic of broadcasting fee to be voted on, no stage for Weidel Kroppeler. The note was dated an invitation meeting in 2022, 3 months before an ARD talk show in which AFD representatives were uninvited at short notice, officially due to a change in the program. The moderator of this program had long since withdrawn from public life and journalism. But what came next was the second bang. A video secretly recorded, apparently by a frustrated editor. It showed an internal editorial meeting in which the editor-in-chief explained, Weidel is becoming too strong, if we bring her in, it will only be with two opposing voices who confront her or not at all. The faces in the committee were static. Even representatives of other parties looked as if they had suspected that this was the case, but not that it was so obvious. But Weidel was not finished yet. I am not here today to stir up sentiment. I am here because the citizens of this country have a right to know how they were manipulated. Then came what she herself called the final point of the first chapter. She opened a folder with a document, an internal position paper from the CDU, dated spring 2021, signed by several parliamentary group strategists. Title: Neutralize the AfD's public reach defense. It contained recommendations on media placement, influencing fact-checkers, cultivating the narrative with affiliated organizations and, most sensitively, a directive to Merz to publicly downplay critical legal developments. And that is exactly what he had done. The threat against Weidel, the desperate attempt to silence her before she could reveal all this. The committee meeting was adjourned prematurely, not by Weidel, but by an urgent motion from the CDU, on internal consultation. Too late. The content had already been streamed live, clips went viral, and the term media cartel was suddenly no longer just a buzzword on right-wing blogs, but part of the main news at 8 p.m. What happened in the next 24 hours was unprecedented. The CDU base demanded the complete disclosure of all party contacts to Cindy Anstalton in an open petition. Several employees of public broadcasters resigned. One of them publicly stated in a live broadcast, "I can't work like this anymore." The FDP announced that it wanted to introduce the motion for the complete restructuring of public broadcasting together with the AfD. A taboo break in the clue. A former CDU employee announced that he would testify before the committee as a witness. The impacts came closer, and Friedrich Merz announced the next morning that he had resigned from the CDU with immediate effect. A brief statement, no interviews, just 2 sentences that many will remember. "I wanted influence. I overestimated him. I am withdrawing." The media reported around the clock. The name Merz was burned, and Alice Weidel had reached the height of her influence. But instead of falling into the jubilant mode, she said at an impromptu press conference, "We are not finished yet." The cleanup begins. It was the 15th month, a Friday, no ordinary Friday, no more. Berlin was tense, the whole of Germany was tense. The streets around the Parliament building were cordoned off, not because of a security situation, but because thousands had gathered outside with posters, banners, German flags, and a shared feeling. Today is not about party politics, today is about justice, because on this day the Bundestag was supposed to vote on a law that had been ridiculed as a radical individual opinion just a few weeks earlier. The complete abolition of the compulsory fee and the transformation of public broadcasting into a voluntary, transparent membership model, and Alice Weidel, of all people, much criticized, hostile, and underestimated, had initiated this motion, with facts, with evidence, with political timing that astonished even her opponents, and with an opponent who had ultimately disintegrated himself, Friedrich Merz. He was gone for good. No more statements, no more party membership. His office had been cleared out. Internal CDU documents showed that his resignation had been prepared internally for weeks beforehand. They had only hoped that it could be carried out in an orderly manner. But then the truth had come quicker. The course had been set, and today it would be revealed whether a scandal would lead to change or whether it would remain symbolic politics. The Bundestag was full, Brick was serious, the microphones were sharp, and Alice Weidel stepped onto the lectern with a calmness that was not feigned. It was the calmness of a politician who knew that today was not just a vote, today history was being made. Esteemed Mr. President, esteemed ladies and gentlemen, esteemed citizens of this country, she began. What we are deciding today is not an attack on the media. It is a protection of democracy. We are deciding whether information should continue to flow from the top down or whether we should return trust to those who support this democracy, the people. No heckling, not even from the Greens. I do not want to accuse you. I would like to remind you of your duty to respect the duty to implement judgments and to act where structures fail. The decision of the Federal Administrative Court was clear. People are paying for content that they neither want nor use, and this at a time when trust in political neutrality has reached an all-time low. She pointed to a copy of the ruling that was in front of her. And what did many people here do? They played it down, looked the other way, threatened to wait, but failed to act. Pause. A quick leaf through the document. I am not asking you to do anything radical today. I am asking you to implement what a court has already determined and what millions of citizens have been demanding for years. Freedom instead of coercion, transparency instead of corruption, participation instead of patronizing. Then she concluded with a sentence that would later stick on banners, in comments, on election posters and in people's minds. If the media is to be truly free, then people must also be free to use it for whomever they want. Posing applause from the AfD ranks. But the astonishing thing also came from the FDP, to the CDU member of parliament. Even from the SPD parliamentary group, some hesitantly but visibly applauded. The vote was set. But before that could happen, someone else stepped up to the lectern, a former CDU member of parliament, now non-affiliated. A bitter opponent of Weidel just a few weeks ago, but today he said, "I would never have thought I would say that, but she is right. And anyone who does not at least vote for a new beginning after these weeks has missed the shot." Then the vote was taken. Draft law on voluntary member financing of public broadcasting. Yes, citation. The motion was passed. The second the result was read out, cheers erupted outside, as if the whole of Berlin had heard it at the same time. Flags were waved, cars revved, people hugged each other. Not because they had all voted for the AfD, not because they were against the media, but because for the first time in a long time they felt, it's about us, not them. In the evening news broadcasts, the wording was clear. Historic day in the Bundestag, compulsory fee dropped after verdict and revelations. Even otherwise dying media outlets had to report objectively and soberly, and many viewers noticed that the tone had changed. The next day, Alice Weidel published a single line on X, formerly Twitter. Now the process of coming to terms with the past is not starting with anger, but with education. In talk shows, journalists discussed how things had come to this. In schools, people talked about media freedom and civil rights, and in editorial offices, structures that had remained unchanged for decades were questioned. The country was not divided. It had been cleansed, not by ideology, but by truth. And Friedrich Mars, he was seen on a remote farm in southern Germany, alone without microphones, without power, but perhaps with the realization that politics is not conducted with pressure, but with trust. So ended a story that began with a threat and ended with your vote, which showed that in a democracy, no one is too big to fall and no one is too small to change something. Yeah,